podcast from Drew and Mike is, I think it's really cool, and that is what I wanted to say.
Two and a mic. The Iran Contra Affair is forgotten at your peril. The level of shadow government corruption, circumventing congressional laws and policies, and the sheer arrogance of the military figures involved, like Colonel Oliver North, will probably surprise even the most skeptical political observer. What we saw unfold in the Senate hearings over Iran-Contra should be revisited by everyone who believes that their government only have the interests of the people at heart. Iran-Contra represents an enormous abdication of democratic duty. It shows just how cheaply governments can value the lives of people who live in different countries. When we today hear political leaders cherry-pick which lives they decide to protect and which lives they will use and discard, as they did in Afghanistan, then I implore you to address Iran-Contra and remember that this happened over 40 years ago, and all the years since, it has been our duty to demand better. We should have demanded more from our leaders. What follows is Aydan and I analyzing the important points as we see them, that the Iran-Contra affair compels us to consider. Aydan, it's great to have you back a second time now, as in, so number 3. So it's your second return, as it were, after the initial one. It's you don't mind coming back and talking to this crazy English dude over here.
No, I happen to not mind at all. No, I actually really enjoy it. It's been something really enjoyable, just to like a learning experience, to learn about new things. It's also really cool to get a new perspective for a lot of the stuff that I have learned through most of my life as an American, and to get a outsider's perspective and their opinions about it. Like, the way that I see America and the way other people see America is probably very different. And so I value this conversation because it helps me understand how other people may see America outside of the U.S. So I'm always happy to be coming back.
Wonderful. And what you say is very similar to the kind of experiences that I have as well in my conversations with people. I like yourself, I love talking with people from different cultural backgrounds with different perspectives, because, inevitably they are going to tell me their view on something that I've always just sort of naturally felt a part of. And they will make me reflect in a different manner upon that which I've always thought to just simply be the case. And they said, no, but it wasn't that way. There is a different story behind it. And what we do is, now at least, is sort of get into some of these different stories. It's interesting because we both develop our knowledge as we go into doing our own individual research. On the topics that we're choosing. So that's really good. Before we start though, so you told me earlier that you are getting involved in some of the local issues, local politics where you are. So in 20 years time, when people look at the beginnings of your political career, they may even look up this particular podcast. But how's that going?
It's good. It's fun to get involved with our local community. It's something that I think a lot of people should get involved with, and it's unbelievably easy. Like, I literally just started watching live council meetings. Most counties, I believe, have them saved on their website, and you can just kind of watch through their videos, and they're maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours long, but just learning about your community and what is being worked to benefit the community, what is happening that is possibly going to worsen your community. Like, we have a prison that is being moved from our downtown to the southeast side of our town, which is a historically black neighborhood, and that neighborhood does not get enough representation through our city council and does not get enough like funding to be in a better spot. And there's talk of moving a prison down there in that same neighborhood, which would only make things worse, like literally visible by playgrounds and houses of like kids and people, and just like people being like, we don't think that this is going to encourage anything good. Like this is just going to be bad. And hearing people advocate for why it should not go there, people bringing up better locations for it, like I wouldn't have known about that stuff if I didn't go down to those city council meetings and understand what kind of pains and struggles were going on in a part of town that I'm not living in. Like I don't go down to that part of town, so I wouldn't know about what's going on down there. So I highly recommend anybody who goes in and is interested in local or is interested in politics at all, start out with local politics and just like listen to what they're going to talk about. Listen to like what's going on in your city, what kind of problems are going on, how you can get involved, ask questions, write, like they'll give you an itinerary for the meeting and just like write shit down. I was writing stuff down the whole time, questions, things that I need to learn more about when I get back home and to read up on for the next meetings. So I recommend anybody do that. So yeah. But in terms of if people come back to this if I ever like actually do a politics thing, maybe they'll just think I was a little bit more radical in my viewpoint as like a young 20-something. But who knows? I'm excited at that possibility.
Yeah, I remember being very impressed by the speech from a young Obama about sort of civil rights, the rights for people of African origin and so on. Clearly, he has always been a great communicator. He continues to be.
Yeah.
But in the White House, perhaps even in Congress, he sort of tempered his enthusiasm somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that. Like some of his earlier videos and speeches that he's given, like there is so much fire and passion inside of him that like you can visibly see it and you can feel it in the way that he's talking. And I agree, it definitely changed when he became like president and a congressman. Like he kind of stepped back a little bit and almost didn't want to be treading on people's shoes as hard. Which luckily we have somebody like AOC who doesn't give a fuck, and she is like all over people's shoes like the whole time. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's her determination is impressive. Her consistency is impressive.
Yeah.
I was having a bit of a Twitter spat earlier on. I kind of defended the Amnesty International on one of their reports because they've been getting a lot of negative publicity recently. And I think people tend to misunderstand sometimes that, organizations like Amnesty International don't defend countries or politics. They defend human rights. And people have to understand that even countries that we like also violate human rights, and they should be called out on that.
Yeah.
If as a friend, if I see a friend of mine being abusive towards a pet or a relative or something, it's my job to say, hey, bud, what are you doing? Sort yourself out,
That's a good point. A little something to think about, America.
Yeah,
I mean, I saw this amazing video of this. I genuinely do not know who it was, but this gentleman came out and he spoke in front of, I believe it was like a UK group, and he was just like, everything that's going on in America right now, how can we not recognize that as like the same kind of things that we see in third world countries in terms of the violence that happens to people, in terms of the lack of freedoms that people experience. And like, why are we not trying to help them? Like, why are we not going in there and fucking like getting the job done like we usually do with countries that are doing fucked up shit that the rest of the world is like, man, that's that's bad. Like the US in the past couple of years has really proven that it cannot handle many like big horrible things. Like we didn't handle COVID, we're not handling monkeypox, we're barely handling our police enforcement, just overall problems. Guns are an ever like growing issue. Like I do kind of feel like most of the other countries should kind of take a look at America and be like, man, we should probably like sweep in there and try to help out. I don't know exactly what that would mean, like in terms of like how that would happen, but I think that what you said, like when the friend is doing something like hitting their dog or hitting their pet, like you as a good friend step in there and you go, "Hey man, what the fuck are you doing to that dog? Like, what's your problem, man?" And maybe some of our allies aren't as good of friends as we think they are, you know? Like maybe we're all kind of in the same boat and we're all kind of like a lot of our governments are doing the same things and they're just kind of like American stuff is just exemplified for some reason. Like I don't know what it would be, why that would be, but I mean, I think a lot of countries are experience same issues, like but just in different ways and in a different level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of criticism, obviously, and justifiably targeting some areas in the United States with regards to their abuse of ethnic minorities, and these are very well sort of documented with regards to Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and these very prominent sort of civil rights sort of movements.
Yeah.
But in the UK, there are these issues too, perhaps not quite in such an overt manner, so not so many shootings and so on, but institutionalized racism exists in the UK, it exists in many European countries. And recently as well, the Metropolitan Police Force, so this is the police force of London, was put on, I can't remember what the actual process is called, but basically that they're under investigation for their own mismanagement and their own the mistakes that they have made repeatedly over the last few years.
Yeah.
So lots of, Sarah Everard was a woman who was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by a police officer. There have been many issues such as this very tragic one. And that needs to be addressed. You cannot be an organization within a community which is based upon the defense of that community and their rights, only for individual elements within that organization to violate those same rights. It just shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah. I recently saw a like a New York Times or a Washington Post article that talked about UK police that were doing strip searches of minors between the ages of 13 and 17, and that they were doing that like on a daily basis to black young men. And I was just like, for a moment, I was like, man, so it really isn't just America. Like, that there is this systematic racism that is just built into this police system. Like, I just don't understand what to do with that alone. Like, I've had this conversation multiple times of just like, when the police are doing shit like this, who do you call? Like, what do you do? There's nothing to do. You would call the police if you like if somebody was doing the shit that the police did out of uniform, you'd call the police and you'd be like, that dude is shooting people in the street like for no reason. The police would come. But like it's the police with the police. Like when the police investigate the police, they often don't find anything. When the FBI or the CIA like looks into the FBI or the CIA, what do they come up with? Oh man, that's so weird. We couldn't find anything that was wrong with us. That's strange. Like who the fuck do you call? What do you do? Like, who are you supposed to, like, who really has your back? And it doesn't feel like these people have your back ever. And I don't know what the solution is in terms of, like, who do you call? What do you do? Like, in America, we have guns to stop people from intruding and from breaking into your home and from doing things that you're afraid of. Like, you're afraid of dying. And then, like, when the police break into your house with like a search warrant that they forged, like they did for Breonna Taylor, like, and you try to shoot them, then they just fucking open fire on you even harder than they were planning on in the first place. Like, then what's the point of having the gun? Like, it should apply to the police in the same way. Like, citizens should not have to face repercussions for shooting police when they break into their home. Like, like, if somebody broke into your home, like a police officer, if somebody broke into your home, would you not shoot them? Like, that's the go-to move, man. Like, and what are you supposed to do? You invade them at like 4 a.m. Like, there's no way that you're gonna know that it's the police. Like, I don't know. That was a side tangent of just like how horrible our like police are across the board. Like, it's not an America only issue of just the police are bad. Like, all police are bad, period. Like, ACAB for real.
Yeah, I mean, look, I try not to take this sort of universal brush and paint everybody as being bad, because I think that would be unfair. I'm sure you feel similarly, but
Absolutely.
the issue is, though, the image that is portrayed as a result of whether it's a substantial minority or larger group, it doesn't matter. When the organization itself is aware of this group and does nothing to eradicate it, then they themselves become complicit.
Yep.
And I think that's the same for every kind of situation.
Yeah.
I do remember the last time I went to California, a friend of a friend is a police officer there, and he said, because we were talking to a friend when we were and he was there, and when we said we were coming, and the friend said, if you get a car and you're stopped by the police, don't open the door. You keep your hands on the steering wheel and let the police give you instructions. If you do anything other than that, they could shoot. And for like a group of Brits sort of going out to, if a policeman, if you get stopped by the police, you've done nothing. You open the door. Hey man, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Shit, what was that?
Here's your reality check. Welcome to America.
Yeah.
Like,
So.
yeah, that's terrifying, dude. What a fucking. I personally have never been pulled over. I've been driving for a while. Never encountered I've definitely been stopped by the police before, and during George Floyd, the George Floyd protests that we had in our town, police interactions there, but I've never been pulled over, but I genuinely do fear the idea of that. I know that I'm probably going to be fined, just statistically, as unfortunate as that is to say, I know that I'll probably be fine. But that it's still just terrifying to imagine, just anybody going through that scenario, that a routine traffic stop could end your life. Just a heads up. A minor traffic violation could be the fucking end of you, dog. And not because you commit a traffic accident, because the police officer deems it so. That's terrifying.
Absolutely, and I can only imagine is a difficult word, but I can only sort of try to imagine how people with darker skin tones must feel under circumstances like that, to be stopped by a police officer and then oh shit, what's going to happen now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You and I have we are passionate about these sort of equality and civil rights and human rights issues. And I'm sure we will revisit this theme again in the future. However, This has been one hell of an introduction into our topic for today.
Yeah.
Which is Iran Contra. Now, a lot of people will not necessarily have heard about this. Would you like to give a little bit of an introduction to what is Iran Contra?
Yeah, so uh, basically in the 1970s in Iran, the U.S. had an embassy in Iran, and if I'm not mistaken, during the time there was a lot of like uprising, and the United States and Russia were both kind of competing with trying to influence Iran towards capitalism in the US's case and communism in Russia's case. Um, and there were conflicts going on, and eventually one day there were like a group of college students that broke into the US embassy, and they took I believe it was like 63 members hostage of the US embassy. Um, and they pretty much just held on to them, and they were like, fuck you, America. You will meet our demands from now on our terms. This was a socialist group, if I'm not mistaken, that ended up taking the Americans. Um, and so America was kind of like having to be complacent with that. And um, Jimmy Carter was president during the time of this whole, like the hostage situation. And he struggled through his entire presidency trying to get the hostages out, like to no avail often. He was constantly battered. Like his campaign ended because like one of the main reasons why he lost was because he was unable to return the Americans back to America from the Iran hostage situation. Um, and then on Ronald Reagan's inauguration, 63 of the Americans ended up being released. And that was Jimmy Carter's action. That was through Jimmy Carter. And I think that it's like, I'm not like a Jimmy Carter stan by any means, but Jimmy Carter is pretty all right. And he did that. Not a lot of people really talk about that. Like in most of the documents that I went through, they didn't talk about that Jimmy Carter was the one who did that. But that was like the last thing that he did on Ronald Reagan's inauguration. Like the same day, he was able to negotiate with Iran to get 63 hostages back into America. And that was pretty big. That was a win way too late. Um, yeah,
There were about 440 odd days
yeah.
between sort of being taken
14,
hostage.
14 months, I believe. And like some of the descriptions of like they said the Iranians said that they were treating them very well, but when they came back home, their testaments or like their testimonies of what they went through, like they were beaten, they were like one member was put in solitary confinement for like multiple months at a time. Um, there was one gentleman who like talked about having centipedes, like every time he was falling asleep, he would have giant centipedes like crawling on his face, and like the PTSD that all these people experienced, like just this horrible, 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 just horrible thing. Um, and Ronald Reagan was pretty much using it as this like sending funds to them to try to release the hostages because there were still some more hostages. Eventually, the Iranians took 6 more hostages. Um, and the US was trying to negotiate with them, trying to like we gave them money, we gave them guns, like Ronald Reagan gave them money and gave them guns pretty much under like pretty secretly, like it was pretty hush hush. Um, and that that money and guns ended up going to Nicaragua to help smash socialist uprisings and a socialist government that was taking place there. Um, and eventually, like this made more drug routes between Nicaragua and America, like South America and in America, more drug routes. Saw huge influxes of cash between the hands of already very rich people. And the whole time, lots of denial about any of it happening. Like very like anytime that Reagan was pushed on it and anytime that anything came out about it, Reagan would firmly stand on I do not believe that I'm doing anything wrong, and I stand on that. And then when it turns out that he did do that thing wrong, he even comes back and he's like, I still believe that what I believed was right, and that makes me a good guy. And like, it's just like this fucking, oh my God. And so then, like, kind of comes out as the more that this information is coming out, the more that Reagan is being pushed on it, and Reagan is being asked, what's up with Iran Contra? What's going on with the Contras right now? Like, why are we giving money and guns to groups that are not ones that we support necessarily? And so, yeah, eventually it ends up becoming a public hearing because it gets so big. And during the time of these public hearings, there are documents being shred, there are testimonies being told of just like, yeah, I was told to do this. I was told to shred, and if I couldn't shred it, then I threw it in the burn box. And if it wasn't in the burn box, then I took it home and I set it on fire myself. Like, these people were told to do what they had to do, and they did it. Like, and the hearings alone, like, I believe it was Oliver North. Wow, his testimonies are just amazing. Like, everything that he has to say, he's always like, I was under the direct orders of the president, or if it wasn't the president, I was under the direct orders of, like, number two. Like, every single time, they were direct orders that were made by the president, and if not the president, like, vicariously through the president, like, through his administration, they were doing all of these things, putting more money into the pockets of them, their friends, the people that they like, and also just trying to stomp out socialism. Like, pretty much like, I think in the documentary that I watched, they said, this gentleman was like, pretty much every single coup that's happened since the 1940s up into the 1970s was a direct cause of the CIA involvement and them funding it to squash out a socialist regime. And every single time they end up getting replaced by a dictator of some kind, like some kind of capitalist dictator who ends up being like, all right, it's time for my money, baby. And it's just fucking terrifying. Like, that the United States and the CIA is continuously, like, I'm sure that we're still doing that stuff. Like, there's no way that we're not. Like, this is always the United States goal, is to do what we're doing, to do what we did in Nicaragua and in Iran, and it's to squash out socialism and to implement the coolest form of government in the whole wide world, which is capitalism.
Yeah, you cover so many points there, and there are some really interesting similarities to the hearings that we're looking at now.
Yeah.
Let's take it back a little bit, because first of all, this general analysis, the fact that the CIA has interfered with the sort of domestic political structures of so many countries, and it's unimaginable exactly how many the CIA has actually tried to change.
No kidding.
It's some of the problems that I have, generally speaking, is that even recently, Joe Biden said that the racist elements of the USA, the aggressive right wing which went into the Capitol building, he said that that's not America. Yeah, this isn't the kind of people that we are. Now, I don't want to comment on that because I don't know 320 million people, and I can't make a claim on that score.
That's true. I'm like sitting here and I'm like, but I'm gonna stick with you on that one. I can't make comments for all Americans, so that's a good point. Appreciate that.
But the thing that is quite interesting, though, is that through all of the different issues the events that we've generally referred to with regards to what the CIA has done and not done, we don't have to talk about 320 million people. We only have to talk about those individuals who are in positions of authority, and what have they done in the name of those 320 million people.
Yeah.
And they're far more easy. They're easier for us to track, at least, and to kind of identify. And when you've got groups of individuals who throughout history they tend to come back and are repeatedly prominent in different generations.
Yeah.
You start to then track a certain profile of individual. I mean, in our previous podcast, we mentioned robber barons, yeah, and
Yeah.
I'll make another reference point back later on as well to this. When groups are dynastic or they have different generations represented in authority, sometimes I believe they muddy the water in the sense that they feel they are defending the national interest, but they very clearly confuse the national interest with personal interest,
Yeah.
because they start to think that, 1 minute, this country is bollocks if I'm not running it. And
Yeah.
so my interest is the national interest. And that's where a lot of the problems lie, I think.
Yeah. I certainly agree. It's a lot of these people kind of like being like, when we were talking like the CIA, like you mentioned, like these are easier people to track. These are easier people to like keep a record of. And they are the ones that were making the decisions for the 320 million Americans at the time. Like they're the ones who were being like, yeah, no, this is going to be in the best interest of Americans. Like that's the part that I guess I just don't understand, is how you can ever imagine that that is going to overall be beneficial to Americans, because in the long run it ended up being extremely horrible. Like, I mean, it only increased drug routes to America. It only, like, there weren't great things happening. There was money being sent out of the country to fund things that aren't relevant to us right now, like that we don't care about. Like, Americans were worried about socialism, but I mean, at the same time, there are plenty of American issues in the country that are going wrong, that like the drugs that the entire fucking Reagan administration went off of for 8 years. Like the DARE program is only as effect. Like, I guess they were like, yeah, no, the DARE program, I guess we could ramp it up by adding more drug routes into America, so that way it really impacts more people. Like, what a fucking crazy thing to imagine. Like, yeah, I just, it's terrifying to imagine that such a small group of people get to be like, yes, this is in the interest of all of the American people, even though it's really only going to benefit me and my comrades. Like, it's not going to benefit all Americans in the long run. It rarely does. Like, these sorts of horrible big actions that are really just for the money. Like, that's all that it really ever ends up being, is for these people to get some extra cash. Like, that's what a lot of what happened with Iran Contra was, like people selling weapons and selling guns and selling them for extra money and scraping off the profits and then shipping that shit back over to Nicaragua to further fund like small like groups of people to fight and on our behalf, like in this crazy way of like, we're just being like, all right, you're going to represent the capitalists and the Russians are meanwhile funding and arming the other side, and you're going to represent the socialists. And like, it's just a proxy war. Like, they're not there, they're just arming and letting them go. And that's like, these people didn't even really understand what they were fighting for. Like, there were some great testimonies from people from Nicaragua at the time who were like, yeah, no, I didn't really need to do this. I was either forced into it by the CIA, or I was told that it was going to be a very momentary thing. Like, I didn't need the extra cash. I was already making tons of money. Like, and so they're just kind of forced in these positions, and civilians get in the crossfire and they end up dying. Like, that was a lot of, I believe, I wish I could remember how many people it was, but the number of civilians that ended up dying in the Nicaraguan conflict was way more than I expected, and it was disappointing, and all funded by the US and Russia, like throughout that time.
Yeah, and what we kind of discussed as well when we were talking about the sort of development of the issue is the fact that whenever we watch a documentary now about Iran Contra, it always starts with the need to crush the Sandinistas, which is basically one of Ronald Reagan's main sort of priorities.
Yeah.
What we don't really hear about in these documentaries is where the Sandinistas come from, or indeed American historical participation in Nicaragua,
Yeah.
and some of the things that they did in these areas.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there will, as I referred to earlier, now I can't find the page, unfortunately, which I had found, but there's, I mean, we were talking about the robber barons. There's, I think, I have to try to find this, but basically, back in like 1856, more or less, there was US, or I should say, one of these American robber barons who basically would just pay to have the natural resources of this country essentially just used, completely usurped, and all to the benefit of their individual, family, their company.
Yeah.
And the USA or the American government would essentially, or whatever government there was at the time, would support that. And they would say, yeah, okay, that is our interest, because they
Yeah.
also provide tax dollars. They provided whatever kind of investment into the government of the day.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, as you've also sort of seen yourself, and I'm sure you'll speak about it in a second or so, is the US occupation of Nicaragua, which many people don't even know about.
Yeah. I didn't know about it. I don't ever remember learning about it. But just, I mean, we saw that they had valuable resources, and so we fucking came in there and we occupied them. Like, with our military. Like, we went in there with our military and we just occupied their streets for years. Like, not like a short amount of time. We were there for a while. I believe it was like 1919, around the end of World War One, and we were there through like the mid 20s. Um, and all because of the natural resources, like you said. And it's always in terms of these natural resources why the U.S. gets involved. Like, we're so involved in the Middle East for the same reasons, and it's because of resources. It's because of oil. It's because of these things that we've made our world turn on. And so, yeah, like, the U.S. occupation of Nicaragua was not a pleasant thing. It was rather violent. And the Nicaraguans were not a fan of it either. Yeah. Would you like to talk more about it? Because,
Yeah,
yeah,
just a little bit, because I mean, after the Second World War, what we see is essentially the American government sending millions of dollars in exchange for benefits to American interests. So there's a company called the Nicaraguan Longleaf Pine Company, and this was completely US owned.
okay,
And they paid Somoza. So this is this dictator in Nicaragua, and they essentially kept him in power. They supported him. They gave him military training. They gave him
yeah,
arms and everything that was necessary. And this guy just basically did whatever he wanted to the country. So they even completely sort of cut down areas of forest. The indigenous people who lived there had to basically go and move somewhere else. They had no responsibilities with regards to reforesting the area. They didn't give a shit. And then thereafter, it was such a brutal government. And even though in the USA, media companies were reporting back that, look, this Somoza government, they're doing this crazy stuff. We're not really comfortable with this. The US continued to support them because they represented conservative capitalist interests,
yeah,
and that was fine. And this all sort of comes to a head in 1972 with the Managua earthquake. So there's a lot of international relief support that is sent to Nicaragua to help with the relief effort. And Somoza, essentially, as a result of his corruption and deliberate mishandling of that effort, nothing is rebuilt. People die. And this leads to a small sort of rebel group called the Sandinistas, having their ranks sort of filled by Nicaraguans who basically feel we've got nothing else to lose. This government doesn't care. They're killing us.
Yeah.
And so they basically create this, or they even further strengthen this rebel movement. And that rebel movement, the Sandinistas, are the ones who Reagan decides to go after.
Yeah. Man, that was such a good freaking breakdown, dude. Good job. I was like, yes. Yeah, man. Like, it just in terms of like the U.S. supports the things that like countries that do shit like the U.S. does, like not respecting native populations, not respecting the natural resources, not respecting the environment, not respecting the people. And if your country does that, you are friends with America, and America will hook you up and tell you to keep doing what you're doing, because it helps. Like when there are more capitalist countries out there, there are less socialist countries out there. So there's less of a competition going on. And like like you said the whole time with what was going on in Nicaragua, like there was lots of talk of these countries knew what was going on. Like they knew that they were being funded and supported by the US. And the US during this time was routinely trying to keep that away from the public's knowledge, like keeping that away from Americans' knowledge that we were funding and we were supporting this dictator in Nicaragua, which is something that Americans do not typically support, is a dictatorship. Like that's something that routinely we are like, no, that's stupid, fuck that. And so they tried to suppress it and they tried to make it so that way it wasn't really talked about. And meanwhile, like during Oliver North's hearings, he was like, yeah, no, all of our enemies knew what was going on. Like they knew what we were doing. They knew that we were supporting the Contra. Yeah,
The Contras, and who were basically
yeah,
the revolution. Well, these were I've forgotten what the actual word was, but these are the National Guard of the Somoza regime who had fled to Honduras, and they
yeah.
were then retrained as the Contras to go back into Nicaragua and basically to pull down a democratically elected government,
Yep.
which is another issue, isn't it?
Yeah, is that like it's routinely that the leaders that get appointed that are overthrown in this way are dictators that are supported by the United States, and that the vice versa is that these other people are democratically appointed. Like they are voted upon by most of the people. Like not all of them have the best forms of democracy, but way more fair than just being like, and you are the leader now. Like, because what the fuck is up with that? Like, just because you get to choose, and just because another country is like, yeah, no, for sure, I like you, we're going to give you all the money and the funding. Like, a democratically supported and nominated individual who was going to lead the country ends up getting overthrown by a country that is the leader of democracy, who was completely fucking assisted by that country. Like the U.S. supported them the whole time. Like the world's leader of democracy fighting against a democratically appointed president. Like what a fucking crazy idea, man. Like holy
It,
cow.
It has to be pointed out that the Sandinista government was also receiving support from Cuba and the USSR. Yeah, so as in there is an ideological issue here. I
Yeah.
want it's good to make sure that we represent all of this information. So there is this element of sort of political unrest, political disturbance. Reagan came in basically because he was saying to Carter, "You don't know what you're doing. Our interests in the Middle East are being basically defeated because you're too weak," and so on. And this was why, with the 440 odd days that the hostages remained in the hands of Iran,
Yeah.
um, Reagan used this continued inability of the Carter government to be able to get them back.
Yeah.
Um, and at the time in which they did come back, it was too late. Reagan had already been elected. I do believe I remember watching a documentary where it was also said that some elements within the later administration of Reagan, had actually secretly negotiated with security elements within Iran not to release the hostages. So now I watched that and I was like, whoa, 1 minute, what is that? And then I said, I'll wait until the end of this and then I'll make a note. And then unfortunately, I can't find it. I will at some point find that, and then I'll put a reference somewhere.
Holy cow!
But the thing is though, because of all of the other stuff that we know about what Reagan did, and also his vice president, who was George Bush, because we know about some of the Bush family in itself, whoa. Because we know about some of the stuff that these people have done, it wouldn't be too hard to believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, but just how terrifying that is, I guess. Like the idea of these individuals being like they're prisons, like they're prisoners at this point. They're hostages, and the idea of these people in the administration being like, let's try to keep them in there for a little bit longer. Let's see if we can continue to try to because that was Reagan's biggest fear during his presidency was the idea of a Soviet invasion of the United States, a socialist ideological change in the mind of Americans. And the closer that socialism got to America's doorstep, the more fear and the more scared that Ronald Reagan became. And I mean, that's why we see that sort of response in Nicaragua with the funding, with how much money he gave, with the training. It's because that was his ultimate fear. That's what he was scared of. But the idea of him being members being yeah, no, let's keep them in prison as hostages a little bit longer, so that way we can try to squash out a few more little things going on while we can, get a few more extra funds going, maybe top off the ammunition supply, just crazy ass shit like that. And then they're like, all right, now we feel okay, we'll send them back. That idea is just holy cow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it worked for Reagan because, as you said earlier, the final sort of 53 hostages were released at the point in which he'd already been elected as president.
Yeah.
So that worked for him. Another thing that you referred to earlier, now I will come back to that later, actually. So we also talked about the revolution in Iran. So this took place in 1979, and that's when the U.S. embassy was sort of broken into by these students or young rebels, and they took the hostages. A lot of people now growing up, they look at the Middle East and they look at certain countries within the Middle East and they say, oh, these guys are our enemies. These guys are our sworn enemies. Yeah, I wouldn't even speak to these guys.
Yeah.
We're talking about a country like Iran that has over 3,000 years of history. Yeah. When the embassy was broken into or was raided by these people, this was I think it was a year after the Shah basically left Iran. And the Shah was the last in line of a 2,500-year monarchy, more or less, in Iran. Yeah?
Do you remember where he ended up fleeing to?
I think he died in Egypt.
Okay.
He died in Egypt. I think it was the age of 60. He had cancer. So
Okay.
he died of cancer in Egypt. The thing is, though, during the time of the Shah, he quite happily, Carter went and celebrated New Year's with the Shah in Iran. Yeah.
That's crazy.
All right, as in, this is how close the US was with Iran in the time of the Shah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then now, whether or not this was because Western intelligence were just simply too blind to see what was happening within Iran, either way, the Shah made a number of mistakes. And these mistakes essentially allowed for the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was an extremely intelligent individual, to essentially develop his support within Iran. And we also have to recognize the fact that under the Shah, a little bit like during the time of Somoza in Nicaragua, a lot of people were poor. They didn't have great access to education. And so the possibility that Khomeini, who was this very well respected cleric, representative of Islam, the stuff that he was saying was very to the heart and to the sort of reality of a lot of the suffering of Iranian citizens. So this is why it was very easy for the people of Iran to welcome Khomeini back when he arrived from France. What we don't remember, though, is the fact that it was quite recent that the USA and Iran had a very close relationship.
Yeah.
It didn't have to go the way that it did. And in fact, as you say, this sort of imperialistic perspective that the West has, this you're either with me or you're against me, this binary bullshit that we keep putting out there, has led to the situation that we have today in the Middle East. It didn't have to be this way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And then the Iran Contra affair just completely scaled out of proportion. But by then it was too late.
Yeah. Just too far gone. And with America, I genuinely didn't realize how close America and Iran were at that time. Like, once again, stuff that you're not really taught about, stuff that you're not really that doesn't really get talked about, because we are genuinely taught like that these people are our mortal enemies at this point. Like, I mean, it's been like 21 years since 9/11 happened, and a horrible event, and we still have such horrible like premonitions about people from the Middle East still in America. Like, we still, like, if I'm not mistaken, people that have a even closely Middle Eastern skin tone, that they come into America, are usually checked for bomb residue, like bomb and gunpowder residue. And I didn't realize that. That's fucking crazy. And it's pretty much like a racially targeted thing, just kind of based off of how you look. Like, a lot of people who wear hijabs end up getting, like, they put your hand on like this powder and it shows if you've been in contact with any gunpowder or explosive chemicals recently, and just this very like racially targeted thing. But the idea of it being like that Jimmy Carter was celebrating New Year's with the Shah in the 70s, like the idea of a US president going out to the Middle East and having like a woo, happy New Year, like that idea is long gone. It's been burned into the ground for the past, like, I'd say maybe like 2.5 decades. Like, it's gone.
Beyond.
Yeah.
Well, since the end of the 70s, essentially.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much since Iran Contra. Like, yeah.
Yeah, conceivably. A little bit before, as in when the Ayatollah Khomeini came and became the sort of supreme leader within Iran, and he was quite clear on the fact that Iran had to be governed as a Muslim country in accordance with the relevant laws.
Yeah.
But also one of the commitments that the Ayatollah insisted upon because he kind of also negotiated with the West before, because he was in France. So he only went back, or he was able to go back to Iran purely because the West allowed him to do so.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, they could have stopped him if they wanted. So clearly there was some kind of an arrangement there. But the Ayatollah said from the beginning, Iran will be run by Iranians, but under the relevant laws of Islam. So I will not allow either Soviet interests and communist interests, nor will I allow Western capitalistic interests to have any kind of governing role within that country. And he was true to that. Yeah. So
I think it's such an important thing to like not give into those two issues of socialist and communist, or socialist and capitalist. Like it's such a I believe you said it, and I wish that I could like remember how you phrased it so well, but just this like stupid, you're capitalist, I'm socialist, fuck you, you're dead to me, I'm gonna invade you now. Like, and this repetition that just keeps cycling through over and over and over again, and it did for a long time. And just how almost embarrassing it is. Like, it feels like very childish to be like you're wearing a blue shirt and I'm wearing a red shirt. Meh, I'm gonna beat you up now. Like, grow up, dude. Like, there are way bigger things going on right now. Like, there are issues happening in each of these countries that are worth examining, that are unique issues unto themselves, that are not necessarily going to directly be fixed because of capitalism or because of socialism. There's an in-between somewhere. There are things that can be worked out. There are compromises that can be made, and it's not strictly I'm a capitalist, I'm a socialist, I'm a communist. Like that ideology is just dangerous, and we've seen how dangerous it's gotten in terms of like countries interfering and putting themselves into these proxy wars to fight, like getting other countries to fight for them in the name of what they deem as like the best form of government, the best form of a country, and it's socialism and capitalism. And we saw the damages that it did for like 50 years, like from the end of World War II through the end of the Cold War. Like, the Cold War was not pretty for like in terms of how many actual like people say that it was a very like bloodless event or like a bloodless war, but in terms of how many like coups and funds that went into these proxy wars that necessarily weren't the US versus Russia, which was the war that was happening. It's more of these proxy wars where the civilians are getting caught in the crossfire, not the soldiers that are getting caught in the crossfire. And so you don't hear about it. You don't talk about it. It's not as prevalent. And just what a disappointing and terrifying idea that is. And that's still that could still be happening, and it probably is still happening, that the US and Russia are both probably funding and actively taking part in a lot of these like smaller conflicts that we see happening around the world, just in their own self-interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Cold War, even if it sort of officially came to an end at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, that there is no indication that it has absolutely stopped. So the name has changed. If it's not Cold War, it's East-West. It's the participants also it's a bit like tag team. One minute it's Russia, the next minute it's China, then it's this again, and so on. And there doesn't appear to be any end in sight. And yeah, I'm with you in what you're saying. There's middle ground. I think there's a lot of middle ground. There are lots of options open, but people don't want to consider middle ground because there is so much by way of financial benefit to be had through war through
Yeah.
funding military objectives, and essentially managing that particular sector.
Yeah.
And this is why we see people who have had military experience, they tend to also do quite well in politics. And yeah, if you have people who have often had to use aggressive tactics as a solution for dispelling problems, I can't imagine it being so natural for most of them to use peaceful means. Sometimes it
Yeah.
happens, of course, because that you would say, "Oh, these guys, they've seen war; they would never wish it on anyone."
Right.
But not all generals are seen on the battlefield either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. It's terrifying to imagine that some generals and some politicians that end up in like who have this military experience, like sometimes you do get politicians who are in those experiences and they don't necessarily respond with violence all the time, but you do have some like that are rather aggressive and that like I mean Putin is a pretty aggressive leader and he was former KGB. Um, and we see like kind of the aggression that he has as an individual, the way that he presents himself, the way that he talks even. Like he is an aggressive and like very to the point man. Um, and yeah, like it feels like he's very much in that militaristic headspace of like it's almost like he's just there to get a job done. And I don't necessarily know what that job is, if it's necessarily for the people of Russia, but it definitely feels more like a personal interest type thing.
Definitely, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, if it's sauce for the goose, it's sauce for the gander, isn't it? So, I mean,
yeah,
if our sort of Western politicians can only see, up to the end of their noses, there's no reason why leaders from other powerful nations aren't the same way inclined.
yeah,
I think it stands to reason.
absolutely.
So, I mean, again, one of the reasons why we also wanted to talk about the Iran Contra scandal is the relevance that it has today, and in many ways, the fact that it is so similar to what we are seeing with regards to the January 6th, the Capitol riots,
Yeah,
and the following investigation or sort of Congress looking into the whether or not Trump had incited the mob and who was responsible and so on. Oliver North, as you said before, he clearly admitted he shredded the evidence. They knew certain people had done certain things. There's a guy called Admiral Poindexter. He had been found guilty for a lot of his actions during the Iran Contra affair. Was later on appeal. He was released, and then a lot of the people from Iran Contra were actually pardoned. Funnily enough, by George Bush, of course. Who else?
piece of shit.
Yeah, well, that's the way it goes, isn't it? And also,
No kidding.
yeah, Trump also pardoned lots of people on his
Yeah,
way out. Yeah, but if I'm not mistaken, the Secret Service, they were told quite clearly, we are going to subpoena your messages, so make sure you save them. And then what happened? They were all deleted.
they got rid of him.
This is history repeating itself. Oliver North, he shredded the evidence. Secret Service, they delete their messages. President Bush, the first one, George Herbert Walker
George
Bush,
H.W.
yeah, he pardoned all of the people who had committed crimes in Iran Contra.
Yeah,
Trump pardoned lots of people who had committed crimes as well when he
yeah.
left. So, I mean, there is a lesson here that should be learned.
Yeah, and it feels as though it definitely hasn't. um, it's been an exciting like week with like Trump. His Mar-a-Lago got raided by the FBI with a pretty hefty search warrant. Like search warrant hefty enough that they could break into his safe and pull his information from his safe. Like, that's not a light warrant. Like, that's not like a small warrant. That means that they have a good feeling that they will find incriminating evidence in Mar-a-Lago that will hopefully put Trump behind bars. Um, I don't necessarily feel like I'd like to be optimistic about the possibility of Trump going to jail. Um, no, he's got too much money. And we've seen how this shit goes. Like Ronald Reagan, nothing happened to him. Nothing's gonna happen to Trump. Trump is gonna end up running for 2024 as like president or vice president for Ron DeSantis. Like, there are a plethora of ways that this could go, and it's not with Trump going to jail. It's just with Trump continuing to do the same shit that he's been doing, and like no lessons were learned. And with with a president with so many parallels, like Reagan and Trump really feel so like connected as one in terms of the way that they operated, the way that they conducted their business. They were both like in a weird way, they both were kind of similar with background. Like, Reagan was an actor, like a famous person who ended up becoming president, and Donald Trump was in a similar position with like whatever that shitty show was where he was the boss, and all of his weird companies and shit. Like, and then being like, I want to get into politics. Like, there are similarities with these individuals that go beyond just their policies and the things that they advocate for. There's even like parallels in their background that I feel as though are kind of like, if history is going to repeat itself the way that it has, like, I'm not really going to advocate for any celebrity presidential things. Like, not really gonna go for that. I don't like the idea of it. Donald Trump, like, I mean, and Ronald Reagan both, they're just these horrible individuals that were able to get away with some fucking horrendous shit. Like, things that most people would not be able to get away with as an individual, but because you are the president of the United States, because you have so much money and so much power, you're able to get away with it. That's terrifying.
Yeah, but they were scared, as in, if you sort of look into the Iran Contra affair, and I mean, when you watch documentaries from 10 years, 15, 20 years later, it's easier for people who had been involved in the sort of White House at the time, that they come forward with a more, shall we say, sincere, reflective account. So,
Yeah.
it was well known that the inner circle with Reagan, they were scared shitless of what the Iran Contra affair meant,
Yeah.
and the potential it could have for his presidency and his legacy.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I mean, we've already seen with these committee hearings with regards to President Trump. People have already started to come out and talk about the inner atmosphere of the White House, what he was doing on that day, some
Yeah.
of the things that he was saying. We've heard some of these accounts. This is only going to get more and more as time goes by, and people start to feel a bit more comfortable about their position.
Absolutely.
So, I have a feeling you're right. I don't think Trump will be. He'll probably be found guilty, but there's no way that he will serve any time. I'm yet to identify an investigation of this sort from the Congress involving a particularly high-level government official where they actually get any kind of punishment worthy of the name.
Yeah, agreed. There are not ones that I can think of. Like, because I was also thinking about that, where a high-ranking official does something like this, and they actually get the punishment that's deserved. Like, because I mean, like we were talking about earlier, these are people that are tracked. These are people who, like, it's not a large group of people voting for these movements and for these things to happen. It's like a small group of like 12 people that are operating and working together to make this thing happen. And we can track them and we can record, like, I mean, I'm sure that there were if I'm not mistaken, during that time period in the White House, there were record players inside of the Oval Office that would record conversation that would happen between the president and anybody in the room. Like that, like you can pull up audio clips of stuff like that. I'm sure that Reagan had like a little button that he could like, this is my hush hush button, boop, and like all the recordings go off. But like just the level of, I know I'm doing something wrong, shh, and then they like grab it all up, they shred it. Like Donald Trump did the same thing. They're still pulling up pictures of like pieces of paper coming up from the toilets of the White House, of like pieces of paper that Donald Trump has shred and with his own hands that he's written and decided to flush down a toilet. And like, honestly, that screams innocent as fuck, really. Like, I can't think of anything more innocent. Like, if you don't have paper scraps in your toilet, pfft, what
Absolutely.
are you doing,
Absolutely.
you criminal?
Ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, I think the only one where there was any kind of consequence was Nixon, and he resigned, obviously,
Yeah.
because of Watergate.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no. I mean, even Bill Clinton, you know, he was impeached, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. But yet he stayed in.
He stayed.
Yeah.
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 And like, I mean, that's it. Is like you can be impeached, but you can stay, and there has to be a specific process to remove the president after an impeachment, and that on its own is a separate process. And like the removal of a president is a lengthy, time-consuming process that a lot of people, I guess, just don't want to do. And like, I don't know, it's weird. The idea of it being such an annoyingly long process to have to be like, man, this guy sucks at his fucking job. We need to get him out of here. Instead, it's going to take the entire presidency to get him out of here. Like, impeachment is not a short process. It is a long, lengthy process that involves lots of conversation. It involves lots of evidence. It involves like it's lengthy. It is a process. And like, I mean, we didn't see anything happen to Nixon after, like, he resigned. He walked away, and then nothing. Like, dude, you broke into the DNC, dog. Like, and
then lied about it.
Yeah, and then lied about it to everybody. Like, no repercussions for that, really. Interesting. Like, it just goes to show, if you have money, you have power, you're fine. There are no repercussions that you will face in this country. Like, because you can avoid them. You have enough power. It's terrifying.
It is worrying, and also when you add to that the fact that the current situation in U.S. politics is, I think, pretty dangerous, because what you've got is one of the two main parties, the Republican Party, basically saying that we don't trust law enforcement in our country.
Yeah.
So if the Republican Party doesn't trust law enforcement in the USA, why would any of their supporters? And so we're essentially coming back to the main issue of the January 6th riots. This is almost like saying, do you know what? Have a way, guys, because we don't trust the FBI.
Yeah. And I mean, like, there has been this shift in mentality for the Republicans that they do not trust the FBI anymore. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert both came out and were like, defund the FBI, the police suck. Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene's selling defund the FBI merch right now. Pretty tight.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, and what a flip of events that is to have taken place in a matter of a week. Like, these are the most conservative members of Congress that we have. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene in particular is just this vile, violent, angry woman who just has no idea what's coming out of her mouth ever. Like, she just kind of goes, and it's disgusting. Like, every time she mentions monkeypox, and she's like, it's a sexually transmitted disease, and only people who have sex and are gay can get it. I'm like, shut up, dude. Like, you're just so annoying. Like, fuck you. Like, you're acting like it's not like, she's always like, it's only gay people can get it, and it's a sexually transmitted disease, so it's no big deal for the rest of the population. And it's like, dude, you act like people don't have sex for fun. Like, it's like, you act like sex is, in America, it feels like conservatives believe that sex is only something to have a baby. It's not a pleasure thing. It's not a connection between two individuals. It is seriously just a contractual obligation to have a child with another human being. And that's so fucking, like, that's not true. That's wrong. Like, that's not all that it is. Like, there's so much more going on. And to simplify it down to this one thing that is, it's just silly. But to see the flip in these politicians because of this catalyst type event of that, they're now like, we must defund the FBI because they're going against our values. Like, as individuals, that I feel as though I don't want the president's home to be invaded. Like, it's crazy. And I mean, the way that Fox News ended up like framing it was awesome. They got like a little helicopter drone flyby around Mar-a-Lago, and they labeled it as Biden administration raids home of presidential candidate or a presidential opponent candidate or something like that. And it's like, that's true, but you're not talking about the fact that the dude is the fucking guy who was like, get on down there and take it on over for me, guys. Like, you're completely negating that huge, monumental point. Like, they were going to overthrow our government. And I mean, I don't know if they could have, but they were definitely determined to try. And that's terrifying.
They tried, didn't they?
Yeah,
Clearly.
they broke in. They got inside of the halls of Congress, and they were like, they were breaking windows. They were hanging out in the House of Commons. Like, it. They did it. They were in there doing what they were told to do, and we're not going to see any repercussions for Donald Trump because of it. Like, even the Republicans and the people who did go in and went into the Capitol, they have like family members that are coming out now and are being like, if my dad is going to jail or to prison for 7 years, Donald Trump should be in prison for the rest of his life. And it's like, they're starting to turn, and they're starting to like at least understand what the fuck is going on, because it feels like there's just been this blind loyalty just because it's this guy. And now there's this realization of, oh, this guy really did some bad stuff. And if I, like, why is it that my family is being impacted so heavily, but this guy told us to do it and there's nothing that's going to happen to him? Like, he directed it. He was like, yeah, no, go on down and take it on over. And there's nothing that's going to happen to him. And it's like, he deserves repercussions for his actions. Like, these are not acceptable actions. Like, and it should never be an acceptable action. Like, people could have died. People did die. Like, police officers died. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, but this was also his sort of final attempt at a coup. I mean, he also tried to get governors and other people who were managing the election process to find me enough votes to
find
change.
me, find me enough votes. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, this is crazy stuff.
the recount, like, it lasted so long, like, and continuously making these claims of like this, like, that this isn't the result of the election. I do not believe that this is the result of the election. And he went on that until like you said, that was his last move. Like all out. He was like, if nothing else fucking works, this is all that I got. And he tried it and it failed. And because it failed, you get to go to prison for the rest of your life. That's what should happen. Like, if it succeeded, then we'd have a different story and things would be very different right now. But that's not what happened, and he should be in prison for the rest of his life. Like, you don't just stage a coup of the government and then go on down to golf with the boys. Like, fuck you, man. And then you buried your freaking wife on hole one, dude. Jog on. Like, you're such a horrible individual. Like, you belong in a prison until you die. Like, you are not a good person. You have not proven that you can do good things. Like, you're continuously a liar, scumbag piece of shit. Sorry about my language, but just, God, man. It's horrible.
It's cool. It just makes my task of writing the introduction easier, because then I'm completely justified in writing how passionate you are in your your expression and choice of words. So,
Cool.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of if there's any other sort of points that we can add to it. But to be honest, I think that covers, more or less the issues that we wanted to address. It's important that people don't necessarily take what we say for granted. Go out there, please, do your own research. Identify some of the topics that we raise, because if a lot of Republican supporters say that they are patriots, and if indeed people care about the state of the nation and the future of the nation, then it's important that they can do so from a position of authority, which means to be knowledgeable in the facts that have taken place up until now, and therefore they can reflect upon the actions of individuals in a more measured way. Please do that. Have a look at what's happened and come up with your own opinion as to whether or not certain individuals have acted responsibly and in the interests of the nation or not.
Yeah, super important. Yeah, always do your own research. Like, there are people that I enjoy watching and following along that do political discussion. Hassan Piker on Twitch is the biggest political commentator on the platform. He's like 30, 31. He was part of the Young Turks, and he does a lot of like political commentary. He's what really inspired me into politics, in such a like in the direction that I've gone. And I've gotten to a comfortable enough spot with my politics and my own point of view that I don't really watch his stuff anymore to develop any opinions. I do my own reading. I do all that stuff. Like, for a long time, I was watching him as somebody and just kind of like repeating the things that they said. And that's not the goal. Like, you don't want to be repeating what everybody else says. You want to be informed. You want to learn. You want to educate yourself so that way you're not repeating the same things that everybody else is already saying. And you want to inform yourself. Like you said, like, knowledge is so important. History always repeats itself. We talked about it here today a couple of times. Like, it's something that will continue to repeat, and educating yourself and understanding these patterns is the best way to just recognize them when they happen. Like, it was recognizable what was going to happen with January 6th when it happened. Like, seeing the lead up of the months of the election up into Joe Biden's inauguration, like, we saw what was going to happen. We saw it. And it's because you can look at previous events in the past and inform yourself and make those conclusions yourself. So yeah, educate yourself. It's so important.
Wonderful. Aydan, thank you very much for your time again, and the effort that you take also in the research. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Zach.